Of that, the Bronx only got 3% in grants and 1% in loans. That is shameful.
We're here today with City Councilmember Vanessa Gibson, who represents the 16th Council District located in the southwest part of the Bronx. How are you dealing with the pandemic, personally?
I'm doing good. I'm overwhelmed because there's just so much information. When this first started back in early March, it was a whirlwind to understand what was happening. So many people that were becoming infected, that were hospitalized, a lot of coordination of services between the city administration, the state administration. It was just a lot. And then making the decision as a city council to close our district and city hall offices and do everything remotely. Forwarding the office phones and coordinating all of that with staff working at home. We really looked at transforming not just the office phone, but our files and data and information that we needed to access. We transferred all of that to our laptops at home. I mean, it was a lot. March was a very heavy month. We saw the highest rates of hospitalizations, lots of interviews, a lot of challenges on the ground, accessing food. As things got worse in terms of COVID, we started to understand a little bit more about it, its impact, and who it was affecting. And we started looking more at COVID-19 testing sites. There started to be a lot more information on the ground, and the city council immersed itself with the agencies. We had weekly calls with sanitation, with SBS, the mayor's office, DIFTA, just lots of things, because as the pandemic got worse, everything was starting to shut down. The businesses, the churches, the senior centers. I mean, it was a very domino effect. And now here we are in May, where we believe that we have, reached the plateau, and now we are coming down the hill, and we've seen much less cases in terms of death rates as well as hospitalizations. But we also want to make sure that we are mindful of how we reopen, because we want to be careful about preventing any new cases from reoccurring after this pandemic is over. So we believe we'll be able to reopen as a city in the next few weeks. Mid-June is the target, but there's a lot of things that has to happen between now and mid-June. So other than that, I'm doing okay. Personally, my family, everyone is healthy and safe, thank God. It's just a lot to manage staff and family, myself, the district. There's always something going on. It's a constant revolving door. There's something new every day. But I am holding up as very best I can.
And you held office at the state level, correct?
Yes, I served as a member of the State Assembly from 2009 until 2013.
It's a weird time legislatively. How does the city and the state operate during an emergency?
Right. So what the city council, I can't speak to what the state legislature has done during this pandemic, since I now serve at the council. But what we have done in the past few weeks is we recognize that while the city was on pause and we really couldn't do a lot of work, the mayor signed an executive order to essentially allow us not to pass land use applications, in which we have to do twice a month. So we were able to do away with that and put it on pause legally. But at some point we had to come back and do business. And so now that all of the work, a lot of our meetings and conference calls were being done virtually through Zoom and WebEx and many other applications, the city council said we have to find a way to conduct business. Members want to hold hearings. The budget process is coming up. The executive budget was coming out in late April. And no matter what, we have to have a budget by July 1st, no matter what is going on. And it has to be balanced at the end of the day. So we had no choice in mid-April, I would say. We had to figure out something. So we started having conference calls as a city council with all 51 of us, talking about what that looks like. We talked to the staff. We talked to Do It. And we really got a lot of input on how we can do things. We also talked to the general counsel and court counsel, because we wanted to make sure that everything we're doing is legally allowed and can be held up in court, because some of our colleagues are attorneys and they raised some of those, constitutional issues. So we were able to get past all of that, and we used Zoom as the application. The council members went through trainings because we also had to restart the budget negotiating team meetings as well, of which I'm a member of B&T. So slowly but surely, mid-April, we started to convene meetings, B&T meetings. We learned about Zoom, and then we said, you know what, we have to start passing legislation. We have to start doing land use applications. And we were the first locality, the first legislative body to implement remote stated meeting, virtually. And we did that in, I want to say, late April, early May, because we've already had a second one. We have another one coming up next week on the 28th. That'll be our third. And we've already started passing legislation. So again, I think that you sometimes have no choice. A lot of people were very happy we started doing that. We had budget hearings virtually. Yesterday was the public hearing, and we had over 400 people testify. We finished at midnight. So it just goes to show you that, when you give people an opportunity, they will, respond. And now, the state legislature is going to return to Albany as well. So again, I think it's okay now because the cases are not as high. Yes, we still have work to do, but we have to return to work. That's the bottom line.
So you mentioned the budget, and I know that I was able to speak to some of your colleagues at the state level, and they were already talking about the state having a $6 billion deficit coming to them, and now we have COVID, and that's that's doubled that. What was the city itself looking like budget wise going into the next fiscal year?
It's a very painful picture. It's bad. We have lost $7 billion in revenue as a result of COVID, with the closure of a majority of non-essential businesses, restaurants, bars, sports events, Broadway, high-level sports events like Major League Baseball season, tennis, everything came to a complete halt. $7 billion loss of revenue. So that means that people are not paying sales tax, then they're not shopping, they're not putting money into the city's revenue, into our coffers. So as a result of that, our budget deficit is $8.7 billion, 8.7. So how do we get to that 8.7? Because we have to balance the budget. A couple of things. We identified $6 billion in reserves that the city of New York has. Thank God we have a reserve. It's a rainy day fund we have. So of that 8.7 billion, 6 billion is coming from reserve. $2 billion are going to be proposed agency cuts and consolidations and recouping unspent money. So you're hearing a lot about around summer youth and summer camp and cutting education. All of that is in that 2 billion. And then the remainder of that, that's probably about 2.7 billion, I think, is going to come from the federal government. Now, the only way that we can lessen the burden of that $2 billion in cuts is if we get federal dollars. The CARES Act and a lot of these measures that members of Congress are talking about, I salute them because they're doing the right thing. But the U.S. Senate has not enacted, the same measure. And if they do, New York State stands to get $34 billion. The city of New York will get $17 billion that we desperately need. So right now we are going to start negotiating the budget, but it's being negotiated with the idea that we have no federal dollars coming in. So that's the problem. We can't negotiate when we have nothing to negotiate. So if we talk about not cutting summer youth, we need $125 million. Where are we going to get it? So that's the reality we're facing now. So the federal government support is crucial to us.
From a district perspective, what will the landscape look like for small business owners when we are able to step out of this pandemic?
Well, it's bad now. I think it will get worse. A lot of our businesses have not been open. A lot of our nail salons and barbershops, non-essential cleaner services, Chinese restaurants and others, even restaurants that could have opened, but it was too expensive to open because they weren't getting any revenue. And they've told me that directly. Allowing them a real opportunity, especially Bronx businesses, Black and brown and immigrant businesses is crucial. We don't get access to all this government money that comes out of SBS. All of the Manhattan businesses get it. The outer boroughs are always forgotten, and it's not fair. So the first round of funding from the city of New York, from SBS, was about $19 million, literally, in April, $19 million. Of that, the Bronx only got 3% in grants and 1% in loans. That is shameful, embarrassing, and disappointing in itself. So we have been really hard on SBS because we're trying to understand, are we not applying for these loans? Like, is that the issue? Are we not eligible? If we're not eligible, what do we need to do to become eligible? What does our bookkeeping and staffing look like? Do we have the paperwork? Do we have the capacity, the insurance? All of the things we know that a lot of others have and we don't, because sometimes we can't afford a bookkeeper. We can't afford a grant writer. Your owner is usually your bookkeeper, right? Or your spouse or one of your children. That's usually how it goes in our communities when we have real small businesses. So we're trying to understand that now. There is a new SBS commissioner that has come aboard a few weeks ago. We have a big town hall with him next Wednesday, the 27th at 9 a.m. It's a Zoom town hall that's being hosted by the Bronx Chamber of Commerce, Lisa Sarin, and the Third Ave Bid, Michael Brady, and others. So we're going to talk and we're going to say, listen, the Bronx is not happy. You've disappointed us. You've not taken us into consideration. What can we do to be better? Outside of that, accessing grants and loans, we also have to look at the harassment that we know will happen and is already happening. A lot of our small businesses are not owners. They lease. They pay rent every month, right? Their rent can go up. Landlords want the rent. If you don't have the rent, they kick you out. And so there's not a lot of protections for commercial businesses as there are for residential tenants, but there are access to legal services. Organizations like VOLS, which is VOLS is the acronym. They are a legal entity that provides legal assistance and guidance for small businesses. SBS has a commercial lease assistance program as well that can help. So there are some avenues we can use. I guess the bigger issue is how do we make sure that these resources hit the owners and the renters on the ground as they should?
Briefly, can you describe your district?
Sure. So I represent the West Bronx in the 16th district. That includes the communities of Claremont, Claremont Village, Concourse, Concourse Village, Highbridge, Mount Eden, Morris Heights, Morrisania. I represent community boards 3, 4, and 5 in the West Bronx along the Harlem River, including Yankee Stadium, the Bronx Museum, and all of the courts. And in terms of demographics, population-wise, majority are Latino. They are Spanish speakers, predominantly bilingual. Many are from Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, as well as Ecuador. I have some Colombians and Mexican Americans. And then we have African Americans. We have Caribbean Americans. And we also have a large concentration of West African families that are from West Africa in Ghana and Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and the Ivory Coast. Many of them are Muslim. They worship, that is their faith. Some of them are Christian. Many of them are, what else did I want to say about the West African community? Business owners, entrepreneurs, large families. That's pretty much been the makeup of the district, even though I will acknowledge, like many others will in the Bronx, that, you know, we are seeing a new generation of new residents that are coming into the community. So we do have a small population of Caucasian residents that live in certain parts of the southern tip of our district.
Is the policing of social distancing, and we're seeing how minority neighborhoods are being targeted unfairly, and there's talk that this is like the new stop and frisk. What do you feel is a good way to address this issue?
We have been very, very concerned about the social distance enforcement by the NYPD. I think many elected officials and advocates at the onset, when we knew that enforcement would have to take place, we never wanted the NYPD to enforce these measures in the first place. And when you look at the executive orders from the governor, the mayor, everybody was confused. What does this mean? What does this mean? And then you as a police officer have to somehow understand it and implement it. So it was problematic from the beginning because a lot of these announcements come with no details and no guidance, and you have to figure it out. And that is not right. I think we as a city put far too much on police than we should. They remove homeless people from the subway, which I don't think is right. We should have social workers. They're enforcing social distancing, and they're not even doing it equitably, right? If there was some equity in the system, maybe people would be okay with it. But when you see Black and brown New Yorkers on the ground with an elbow in their back or a cop sitting on you, that's unacceptable. And then if you go to white neighborhoods, they're giving out face masks. Or if you look at what's happening in Jewish communities, they're being allowed to gather in masses for funerals, and it's okay. That's a real big problem. But I think for us in the Black and brown community, it comes with a systemic pattern of racist policies that have been in place for a very long time. Stop, question, frisk that was deemed unconstitutional. And then we don't want to reinstitute that and call it social distance enforcement. So because of pressure from a lot of us, we were not happy. And we saw too many videos. And what really killed me was when I saw that poor woman in Brooklyn with her child, because she was wearing a mask improperly, it was under her chin. Somehow she has words with the officers in transit and she ends up on the ground. Like, what? A mother and her baby is right next to her? Like, that's disgusting. So after all that happened, the mayor and the commissioner finally agreed that maybe we should loosen up some of the restrictions. So they decided to not impose arrests and summons if you violate social distancing. But what they should do is give out masks. I've seen cops in the Bronx, they don't even have face masks on themselves. And I'm like, well, where are you going as a cop? And you're on duty because you're in uniform. So again, I mean, I'm not casting the entire department because sometimes they feel like we're racist or we're anti-cop. No, I'm very pro-cop, but I don't want my people on the ground and your elbows in my back. Like, there's nothing wrong with talking about both. A majority of the interactions with cops during this pandemic have been good. The cops have come, helped me give out food, take this box, pick this up, give this out. They've been really, really great. But the reality is when you see one video, it's one too many, and that's not right. So now today, what you'll notice, the mayor announced, thank God, that the anti-gun violence groups like SOS, like Bragg and Guns Down Life Up, they're going to be the ones that will enforce social distancing. This is exactly what we wanted anyway, because they know the people. There's a continuity of services, So I feel like we have to wait and see. I was very concerned as I close because I'm very passionate about this. If we were on the ground in May, what is going to happen to us in the hot summer? And that was my fear. And now with Memorial Day weekend here and, beaches being closed, I mean, people want to get out of the damn house. They want to go outside. I don't see there being a problem if you gather and you social distance and you have a mask. We have to educate our people because a lot of young people don't want to wear a mask because they don't think they're going to get COVID. So you have to educate them. So that's what the anti-gun violence groups will do.
What do people need to understand about rent freezes that has to happen that hasn't happened yet?
People need to understand that is a very tall order to ask for. It would essentially mean that there would be a period of time in which you will not have to pay your past rent. And essentially what Governor Cuomo has done is he's only delayed the inevitable, right? He's delayed the payment of rent, and many people have taken advantage of that because they've lost income. They can't pay the rent. So all of that rent is piling up back from March. And then when the moratorium is lifted, you're going to owe months in rent and you're not going to be able to find revenue. And a lot of families are going to face eviction. I personally don't think the governor at this point, we're already in May, if he really wanted to put in some sort of a rent freeze, he would have done that. He would have said to all the landlords in New York State, we're going to do away with March, April, and May. That's what people really wanted to hear. They wanted them to say, give me 3 months free of rent. That's what they wanted, right? Not delaying it, but I just don't want to pay it at all because I can't. And I don't believe the governor ever was going to do that because the landlords are really crying. And again, I look at it from both angles. I have a lot of friends that are small landlords. They own, 5 and 6 buildings, not 100, and they're struggling. You still got to keep the lights on. The garbage has got to be picked up. The floors need to be mopped. Like, you want the elevator running. And people don't always understand there's another side. They think that every landlord is a slumlord. Yeah, we have slumlords, but we have some good ones that are trying their very best. And you know what? During COVID, I have highlighted some of my landlords have actually been giving out food. And this food is not free. It's free for the tenants, but somebody's paying for it. And so I just didn't believe the governor would do that. But what we are going to have to do is find a way to either develop a new subsidy program for these families that will fall really behind in rent. We're going to have to beef up on lawyers and housing court, because as soon as that physically opens up, everyone's going to housing court now, because now they got a notice. We're going to have to find a way. We're already talking about it. Legal aid, legal services, they're already coming to us now because it's budget time, and they're asking for more help to hire staff. It's just been a real challenge. There have been some illegal lockouts I've learned about, where people have been illegally locked out of their apartments. And so that's been a challenge. But a lot of us know that a majority of the housing court cases are going to be non-payment of rent. And so at this point, the only thing we can see in terms of relief would be what the Rent Guidelines Board ultimately votes on in June. And you saw their proposals, very, very low. I think it's like 1% for, no, it may be 2% for a 2-year lease. And then it's a 0% for a 1-year lease. So your rent will remain the same. And that's pretty good compared to the amounts that the landlord and their representatives wanted. So I think at this point, that's probably the only relief we will see, unless there are some other programs that we try to develop in the city.
If the federal government and the state government is not there for local businesses, what are a couple of strategies that they can probably utilize in order to ensure a reopening when this is all said and done?
You mean small businesses?
Yes.
I don't want to think about a scenario where we don't get federal dollars, because it's really going to be bad. I'm heartbroken thinking about what summer looks like for our kids, and I am fighting like my colleagues to find revenue. We are looking at private dollars where we can get some investments to cover. Again, it's not a lot of money. We probably need about $300 million to cover all the youth programs. The education cuts are about $700 million, which is a lot. Small businesses, we're going to need a major infusion. We are hearing a lot of good things from Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand. We've been on multiple calls with them and their teams. The big factor in this is Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is the one that's holding everything up. That's the reality. And I don't know. I have a meeting at 3:15 with the BNT. So we should be getting another update, because again, everything is going to really be predicated on federal dollars. If there is a scenario in which we don't get this money, we're going to have to make cuts. That's just the reality. In order for us to avoid, and this is a real scenario, I'm a city worker, and there's a potential without federal dollars that the administration is going to have to lay off city workers, meaning teachers. Nobody wants teachers laid off, and we definitely don't want no cops and firefighters laid off, because everyone needs a job right now. That's the worst case scenario. But before that happens, we can go back to agencies and we can start looking at savings, and we can start cutting and cutting and cutting. And what we also can do, as opposed to layoffs, any positions that are not filled, we don't fill them. And we allow people to attrition out through retirement, right? Cops and other public servants, and we don't backfill those positions. That saves us a ton of money. Pension costs, contracts, a lot of those things we have to pay legally. We don't have a choice. But the only scenario, again, in which we salvage ourselves is federal dollars. And if not, that means more cuts.
Do you have any final thoughts?
Sure, yes. What I would love to do is talk about what the healing and rebuilding means for the Bronx. The Bronx has taken a very big hit in this pandemic. If you look across the borough, I think there are certain parts of our borough that were already struggling that are now further struggling. The reliance on, Medicaid and other safety net programs, the underlying health conditions that many residents have had. And when you look at a lot of the deaths that you have seen, a lot of the data we're getting now is categorized. So we know numbers of people that lived in public housing. We have ages, we have race, we have ethnicity. We have all these breakdowns where we can look and see, well, why so many people die in 10467 or 10469 or my zip code 10456. So a lot of that information that we now have to figure out a plan. There is nothing worse than moving forward in this pandemic and not having a plan. There has to be a plan for the Bronx. It has to be different from all the other boroughs. And it's going to take a lot of work over the next I'd say 18 months. The next, time, our terms as we leave the council and we leave City Hall, it's really going to be all of our work now. It's a post-COVID world. That's going to be the rest of our tenure.
I mean, if we had more time, I mean, I'll keep you on for like another 2 hours, but I know you're very, very busy. And again, thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. Thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to me. And
Oh,
again,
sure.
thank you for your work. Thank you for everything. And yeah, let's do it again.
Okay, sure. We'll stay in touch. Stay
Okay.
healthy. Thank you. Blessings to you. Enjoy your weekend.
You too. Have a great weekend.
You too. God bless. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.